Welcome to Right There With You, where we lean into life's biggest questions, challenge what we think we know, and discover the strength we've had all along.
This is my friend and co-host, Ciarra Jones, theologian and lifelong explorer of faith, identity, and purpose.
And say hello to my co-host and buddy, Cass Cooper, a professional chaos whisperer who loves untangling the complexities of human relationships.
Here we embrace the journey, no matter how uncertain, or transformative it gets.
And no matter where you are on yours, we're right there with you. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Right There With You. I am so excited about this episode today, Cass, because we have one of my favorite people in the world to talk about something that people ask probably both of us a lot all the time, which is about HR, HR processes, the role of HR and HR policy. And so before we get started, I'd love to turn it over to you, Molly, to say a bit about who you are, and then we'll dive into all the burning questions about HR and well-being at work.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. I love all the topics you both have covered so far on your podcast, and I really think that they are so beneficial to everyone. So I feel really special being invited here.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. We just want to build up everybody and make sure that people are getting the information that they need. And like CJ or Ciarra said, we get a lot of questions about HR, but we're not HR professionals. We work HR adjacent. So bringing someone on who knows the ins and outs and can speak to our audience, and especially in this time of corporate, all the things we'll get into. But anyway, glad you're here.
I'm an HR professional out in the Pacific Northwest. I work with businesses really of all kinds, all industries. So I have come from healthcare. I have come from retail and food service. HR can vary a little bit, and companies obviously can vary by industry, but I've worked with quite a few. So
absolutely.
Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. We're so excited. And something Cass and I have been talking about a lot in some of our previous episodes, particularly around HR and Black women, is we see there's been 300,000 layoffs of Black women in the last few months. And that has meant, I think both of us have been getting more questions about what recourse do I have if I'm fired? Where do I go? How do I deal with toxic bosses, as the Trump administration has kind of impacted how workplaces are operating overall? And one thing I'll say as someone who is a consultant and has had W-2 jobs is I am kind of afraid of HR. I kind of don't know when to tap on HR or if they're a safe place, especially because I work primarily with Black women. And so I'd like to start off with just, what do you wish employees understood about HR's role, and what does HR really do within organizations?
Yeah, great question. I definitely have. So first of all, I haven't always worked in HR for my entire career. So I know what it's like to be an employee and feel potentially intimidated or unsure or nervous about HR. When I used to work in retail as a general manager, sometimes all of a sudden I'd look around in HR, from the corporate office would be in my store, and I would wonder, am I in trouble? Is something wrong? And that's where our brains go. Our brains are biologically designed to skew negative to help keep us safe. Sometimes that hypervigilance is a good thing, and sometimes it's not needed. But I understand what it's like to somewhat be intimidated or unsure about HR. And I think one of the biggest myths is that people think HR's main job is to protect the company. And I'm sure even some HR professionals listening right now, if they are, might wonder where I'm going with this. But HR does have a reputation of just protecting the company, because people often go to HR when something's wrong, when they're upset, when they're angry about something or unsure about something, and they may not always get the outcome that they want. And what I typically tell people is HR's job isn't to protect the company. That's legal's job. That's actually their main job. Whether a company has a legal department of their own or they have external counsel, legal's job is to protect companies. They do that full time. HR doesn't have any more responsibility to protect the company than IT does, or marketing, or finance. Every employee actually has to protect the company to some degree. You can't just be an employee and forget to lock a door, leave your laptop in the car unlocked, and someone can take it and access information. So everybody has some level of responsibility to protect companies, but HR is like any other department. IT has responsibilities that can sometimes be very serious. Marketing can't just put out irresponsible or insensitive content without there being recourse, right? Finance has a responsibility in the company. So all departments have a responsibility to protect the company, and HR is not any more than that. But a lot
Hmm.
of people do view HR like they have the company's back and not mine. And they're not
Hmm.
seeing it as though that HR just has work to do like every other department, right?
Hmm.
We're working on posting jobs, creating trainings, handling promotions, handling however a company does compensation, working on benefits and open enrollment, which is a big job. Just like other departments have things that they do throughout the year, so does HR. And
Hmm.
HR is typically the place where employees are directed to report concerns or complaints. But that doesn't mean that HR, has more responsibility than any other department, like I said. If you look at any org chart of the company you may work at, or an org chart of a company you want to work at, any org chart, HR is not at the top. So just like senior leadership or executives or business owner, depending on company size, tell other departments what they have to do, HR also gets told what they have to do. So when employees come to HR with a complaint and maybe it doesn't go their way, they tend to think that HR protected the company, sided with the manager,
Hmm.
doesn't believe the employee, but HR doesn't run companies. So it's ultimately senior leaders who decide outcomes of things, and HR tends to be the messenger. And I think
Hmm.
that a lot of employees don't understand that HR functions as other departments do. And HR gets told how to do things like other leaders in other departments might.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's such an interesting and great take because it is something that even as an employee who has worked in several different W-2 driven jobs, I do forget that they do have a primary function. Um, and I love what you said about like they're just the messenger. I feel like that is like so critical to understand because there are business decisions that are made. I think of a chief people officer that I know and she's complaining about her budget and it really dawned on me like she gets told by finance what her budget is just like anyone else and people come to her asking for all these things and these perks and these whatevers, but she would love to provide them. Her words, not mine, but she can't because their budget is capped at a certain amount, just like marketing's budget or finance kind of dictates where things are going to go. And I think that's do you think maybe it's because like there's a people oriented space of it that people get kind of misaligned with what the primary purpose of it is?
I think it's human nature when you go to someone with a problem, you want them to believe you, you want to feel listened to, and you want a good outcome. Not necessarily in a selfish way, you just have a problem that you would like addressed. And when they go to HR and confide in HR with what their concern is or what their complaint is, when they see that they don't get the outcome that they want, or maybe they don't see that anything changed, they immediately believe that HR didn't believe them or sided with leadership or didn't do anything. A lot, I've heard from a lot of people that they said something to HR and HR didn't do anything, or they reported this to HR and HR didn't do anything. And I usually say, unless you follow HR around all day and look at their email box and listen to their phone calls, you don't know what they did. But a good HR professional will, with any complaint or concern, whether it's minor or major, will investigate it to the degree it needs to be investigated, and then make recommendations to leaders on what should happen. And I've had a number of situations where I thought somebody should absolutely lose their job for something that they did that was egregious. And they did not lose their job because leadership wanted to keep them. Terrible things. And then I've had situations where I absolutely did not think somebody should lose their job, but leaders did not want that person anymore, so they lost their job. And I think that illustrates that HR isn't the decision maker. We're not in charge at any company. And it feels like we have authority because people come to us for raises, for help with their boss, truly reporting things that are of concern. And if they don't see that, the outcome that they wanted is happening, they think that
They think that
HR
HR.
decided. Got a little feedback there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was
I
that
heard
me
that
saying
as well. I tried to unplug my headphones to see if like that was
that was
the
helpful?
No
I don't
challenge.
know
problem.
Yeah,
what is
yeah.
there was a little double echo, but I don't can you hear that too, Molly? I don't know what is causing it, though.
I just only heard it when she, I think, unplugged something. I haven't had any issue with the
Okay.
sound.
Okay, good.
Okay, cool, cool, cool. Perfect,
I
perfect.
think we're good because it all records separately or whatever.
Okay,
So
perfect, perfect.
yeah.
Sorry, we'll cut this out, but please
Uh
continue.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so I think when they come to HR with a truly concerning issue, and then they don't get the outcome they want, or they, you know, just don't see that any change happened, they really think that HR either didn't believe them or didn't do anything and didn't take action. And what I like people to understand is at any company, HR can't just decide they don't like someone and terminate them. That is not how HR does not have that ability at any company. It's leaders who decide. And a good HR professional will make a strong recommendation as to an outcome. And hopefully they have relationships with leaders to where leaders do want to listen and trust HR, but they don't always. And, HR often gets blamed. And that's not to say there aren't poor HR professionals. I think that there are people in any job in any industry who, whether it's an integrity issue or an experience issue, it they're not the best in their role, and that happens. But
Yeah.
a good HR professional will always make a strong recommendation. But HR doesn't run the company, leaders do, and leaders don't have to listen to HR, even if we're making a very sound recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's so fascinating of, leaders lead the company. And, even though, and I think my question is, do you think that as an HR professional, there's a challenge when you come to a leader and you do make a strong recommendation? You're like, no, this is actually what needs to happen based off of ABC, XYZ reasons, and you make your case. What can people do to, like, either help you with that or, bolster their case or make it easier for you to make their case? Like, what are some things that people can do to advocate for themselves, not just with HR, but with leaders in general?
Yeah. And a good HR professional will help employees with their complaint. So if an employee comes to me and says, I'm being bullied, so I'm going to ask them a lot of questions about that, because if somebody says they're being bullied, I don't actually know what is occurring and when and who's involved. So we have to ask a lot of questions. So if someone comes to me and
Mm,
says they're being bullied by their manager or an employee, I'm going to ask, tell me about the last time you were bullied. Who did it? Who was there? About what day was it? And sometimes people don't remember the date, and that's okay. It's, on or around whatever date, sometime after the meeting on Wednesday. But we try to get these details, right? So in the course of figuring out what's going on, I'm going to try to get these details. And then depending on if what I think is occurring is illegal or maybe just bad behavior, that can change your recommendation. I think we've all been in situations where two people say two different things and you have to decide who you're going to believe. That's a tough situation for a lot of people, and everybody has their point
mhm.
of view. So I typically remind people to check their bias. Even if you happen to like one person, you've worked with them for a long time, that doesn't mean the person that you just happen to like more can't be wrong. And any other kind of bias that could exist. But ultimately, if it's a very serious issue that I think potentially has legal implications, and other HR professionals are hopefully doing this, and managers can take note, sometimes I have to tell a very senior leader, hey, obviously the decision is yours. You know what my recommendation is and the reasons. If you are going to do a different recommendation, which is in your right to do, I'm just going to send an email to you recapping this conversation and outlining what I recommend and why, and outlining what you're doing, because, gosh, and I'm nice about it, right? But gosh, if this goes sideways, I want to make sure that my recommendations and my integrity are well represented. And, this is a decision that is yours, but you may be out on a limb alone. And are you comfortable fully owning the decision by yourself without HR support? And that often gives leaders pause. And when you tell them that the decision they're making is theirs to make, but they don't have the support of HR or maybe other departments, it might not even be an HR situation, right? But a lot of people are like, ooh, am I fully comfortable owning this decision by myself?
Yeah.
And sometimes that gives them pause. And I've had to send a few emails like that. And I have seen senior leaders lose their jobs over decisions that they wanted to make that, other people recommended against, but they made them.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate that question, Cass, and that really great explication, Molly. And I think this is actually a really nice segue into our kind of segment on toxic workplace culture. And something I want to say, which was not one of our like pre-prepared question, but something I've been sitting with a lot because I work right now. I've been doing a lot of one-on-one consulting for Black women who are trying to recover from toxic workplace environments. And something that I see in myself and the women I consult with is a lot of us do avoid HR because sometimes, like, especially around with Black women in the workplace, things are very covert. It might be your boss just doesn't ask you questions when they talk to everyone else in a meeting, or your workload is a little bit heavier than your colleagues. You're not getting work that's as visible. And so I know in my experience of workplace conflict, sometimes I've gone to the ombuds office. If our listeners don't know the ombuds, like they're like I guess, like, by nonpartisan mediators within organizations that are truly confidential. Ombuds I've gone to because they really cannot tell anyone what your conversations were, but they also can't really demand or any recourse or solutions either. They're just that mediator. At least that's my understanding. But I guess I wanna say, like, when do you think it is safe, I guess, to go to HR around, like, these more covert issues? Because I feel like then you have to kinda prove. I think for a lot of Black women, there's this feeling of like, "Well, how do I prove that my boss doesn't say hi to me in my meetings?" Or, "How do I prove that my boss, like, is kind of covertly bullying me?" And I guess I felt like, where does HR fall within these kind of toxic, interpersonal, interstitial, tiny moments? What is the recourse there, I guess? I don't know if that's helpful.
That is very tough.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that probably most people and probably most women have encountered those subtle, covert, um, instances of poor behavior, whether they span best case scenario, right? They span from just a lack of self-awareness from a manager or coworker. That's
Yeah.
kind of best case scenario. Worst case scenario, they're obviously rooted in bigotry, outright bigotry.
Mm.
And it is tough, as I described earlier, even when HR believes you,
Mhm.
we still have to take this information to senior leaders to decide. And I know that there might be some people listening who are like, no, at my company, HR does decide. It's like, well, hold on. If HR wanted to fire the business owner's son, right? The business owner is going to say, what are you doing? You can't do that. And that's,
Yeah.
a very obvious example. But the point is that I think that a lot of the mistrust with HR comes from not understanding HR.
Mm.
And I'm sure you've heard the whole HR is not your friend thing, right?
Yeah.
HR is not your friend.
Or HR is your boss's friend. That's what I've always been told, like, HR is
Huh?
your
Yeah, HR is your
Uh-huh.
boss's friend.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So back to kind of, the conversation we had towards the beginning, when employees better understand how companies work, I think then they're better able to navigate a concern. Because if a lot of
yeah.
employees think, well, you go to HR and HR fixes it for you, or the reason you didn't get the outcome is because HR's best friend with the manager, it's like, hold on, we're making assumptions here, we're connecting dots that maybe shouldn't be connected.
Mm,
But, any kind of employee that's experiencing any kind of small thing with a manager or coworker, it is very tough. And ultimately, it comes down to what the manager, or if the issues with the manager, what their boss wants to do. And
mhm.
unfortunately, if a director, just to use a sample title, really likes their manager and a couple of employees have valid complaints about the manager, those employees may not be able to get a favorable outcome.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just may not be something that can happen, and that's not to say I support that, I don't support that.
Mm, mm,
But I encourage a lot of people to speak to employment attorneys. I think one thing I wish
mm,
that people knew is that most employment attorneys do free consultations. So most employment attorneys work on contingency, which means that they don't require upfront payment. They only get paid, if you get a settlement or an award. And so I think what I would encourage people to do is, if you think you're experiencing, whether it's, very pronounced or maybe more subtle, if you think you're experiencing discrimination or any other kind of illegal treatment, to spend some time just Googling employment attorneys in your area. And it is very normal to have to talk to many before you get a consult. So don't be deterred if the first couple aren't going to speak to you. Be ready to call 10 or 15, to be honest. A lot of people don't realize that employment attorneys work on contingency. So don't think you have to have $1,000 ready to go to talk to an attorney. And I think that
yeah, that's good
more
to know.
employees understanding that is a good thing.
Yeah, I didn't actually know that because, there's been some times in my career where I'm like, oh, I probably should go talk to a lawyer. I'm like, oh, it's just another task. It's
It
Yeah,
is.
another thing to go do, and it's another. But then
And you
I'm
feel like you
thinking,
have to defend what you're
ah,
experiencing. It can be emotionally taxing, absolutely.
and I think we're just living in a time where people are so afraid of being fired, about recourse, about
yes.
making the wrong step. If I do this, how is it going to impact my career? The proverbial in this economy, I can't afford to fill in the blank. And I just think, as someone who has gone to HR and has had advocates there to help me move things along and do what's in the best interest, not just of myself, but as the company and my leadership saw fit. I just wish more people were empowered to not be so afraid of their losing their job if they go and talk to HR. And I do think this myth that HR is you're not really for you, is pervasive. I mean, I've definitely said that,
I
to
say it
people, and
sometimes,
I
yeah.
say it, but I say it as an advocate of this is why we need equity and inclusion workers, people who like an ombudsperson in a university or wherever setting that you can go to and you can say, I don't know how to handle this. I think there's some discrimination here. Who don't like, I have no skin in the game as your equity and inclusion counselor coordinator. I just want the best outcome for you. I can have influence to how you talk about things and who you talk about.
Mhm.
But ultimately, the outcome is up to the leadership, the manager, HR, and you as the employee. I think sometimes employees feel like they don't have any recourse and nothing
Yeah,
to
our
do, and they're
agency.
just at the whims of which is especially hard when your manager is not the best. Like you said, in the best case scenario, just ill-equipped for good leadership. Worst case scenario, they're outright bigots and hurting you, you know?
No, that's a great point, Cass, and I think, like, it makes you think about I think especially for, like now I've had maybe 3 to 4, like, big girl jobs in my career. Something I've realized is, like, especially when I've left toxic environments, I'm like, "Okay, that environment might have been toxic, but even this new environment has some things that are difficult," and I've had to learn, like, that part of just any work environment is going to be interpersonal tension, interpersonal conflict, and part of my own career development, I think, has been trying to discern when is this toxic or when is this normal interpersonal conflict that just exists because
Mm.
we're humans in a structure. And I think that I see that particularly for the women of color that I work with, is trying to figure out, is this toxic or is this just normal interpersonal conflict that comes into any kind of human structure? And so I'm curious for you, Molly, as an HR professional, when do you start to think, whether talking to an employee or listening to an employee, like, ooh, we're getting into toxic territory, not just normal interpersonal conflict kind of territory or normal areas of difficulty or growth that any organization might experience?
Yeah, I mean, HR, first, there's a ton of positions in HR, so not everybody who works in an HR department knows, you know,
Mm,
what's going on. But if you
yeah,
work
that's
in
good.
an organization dealing with employee relations, you tend to start to hear what either divisions or departments or managers or leaders, potentially aren't as successful as some others might be. And
Love
so,
how calculated and tactical you are with your
Yo,
language.
you
Like,
are amazing with your
Ciarra
language.
and I are not that way by any stretch of the imagination. So I love that you're like, it's less than ideal. Like, I love that. Like,
Yo,
okay.
Molly for Congress, for real, Molly.
no, no, it's
Nope.
not
She's
going to
like, nope,
happen.
not
No,
my ministry. Not
I
happening.
think I think part of it is I have seen there is a lack of manager training, period. You'd be
Mhm.
surprised how many
Yeah,
people are given manager or leadership roles and they are told what meetings to be at and what reports to have done and what the key metrics are, but they're not given interpersonal manager training. And
Yes.
so, because
100%.
I've seen so much of that, I can empathize with how difficult it is being a manager. That doesn't
mhm,
mean I, think that them treating people badly is okay, because I don't. But I mean,
yeah,
I even understand why micromanagers micromanage, whereas
mm,
employees don't care why they do it. They just don't want to go through it, which is valid, super valid. But I just have seen a lot of managers who, as I kind of mentioned, just lack the self awareness, lack the training, best case scenario, and then all the way up to worst case scenario, and their behavior is rooted in bigotry. I have,
mm,
seen the whole spectrum of that, and so within that spectrum, if I'm hearing from more than one employee, or if an employee has an exceptional detailed complaint, so it's a different kind of complaint if you say, my manager is just really toxic, because I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means. I don't know how long it's been going on. So then we start to ask questions, what's an example of that? Help me, when you say they're toxic, give me some examples. How do other people describe them? I'm trying to get a picture of what's going on. And then,
yeah,
is what's going on illegal, or is it not great management? And then
mm,
making recommendations to their leader on how we want to handle it. Can we get them training? I've sat with so many managers and I've had to say, how do you want to be perceived as a manager? And I have them
mm,
tell me how they want to be perceived. And then I tell them the feedback that I've gotten. And we talk about the gap that there is, and then how to change that perception, because there are a lot of people who will say, well, this is just how I am. Are you saying how I am isn't okay? This is just how I am. And I want you to be perceived how you want to be perceived. And if that isn't occurring, we want to make sure that we're making appropriate adjustments. So so you're acting with an alignment, of your own personal value system, right? So an
Yeah.
organization can say you have to do these things. Okay, great. We know that. We'll work on that. But if somebody says they really value respect and they want to feel that, they want to feel that their employees are respected. If I tell them that their employees aren't feeling that way, let's talk about what to shift so employees do feel that way.
Yeah.
And I'll tell
Yeah.
you, not everyone is open to that conversation. People only change if they want to. And
Mm.
if I am talking to a leader and they are not interested in change, there is not much I'm probably going to be able to do about that other than speak to their leader and hopefully I can get them on board with some kind of plan. But as you probably are well aware of, some leaders aren't super interested in the interpersonal experiences of team members or staff members.
Abs
And
abs
that's a tough situation.
Yeah, there's a book that's coming out. She's actually the keynote at the conference I'm attending, and the title is The Devil Emails at Midnight, and it's all about these different, which is very clever,
Great title.
but it's all about these different personas of leaders that we all have. And I think one of the things that I look forward to reading in this book is the idea that you can be a caricature of yourself as a manager, as a leader, but that doesn't necessarily make you, one, a bad person, two, even a bad leader or a bad manager. It might be, in the author, in the last chapter, she talks about how she was the toxic micromanaging leader,
Mhm.
but it was because she was
So vulnerable.
experiencing a deep amount of grief after her father passed. And she
Yeah.
was like, I'm not proud of the way I acted. It was not, the leader that I am now. She gave examples of where she came into a meeting 30 minutes before, had her entire team change their entire presentation deck, switch things out, and then she was, like, upset that the presentation went poorly, right?
Mm.
And it's like, well, we can see that and say, like, "Oh, that's just toxic behavior. I'm gonna go to
Hmm.
HR and talk to them about it." But if we don't humanize the leader as well, it makes it very difficult to actually really come up with a solution. And hopefully most leaders are, if you're listening to this, hopefully you're a leader that wants to make changes and do better for your people and take insights, but not every leader is that way, like you said.
No, I love that. One thing I just want to add, like, one, I want to say, like, something that I appreciate, Molly, which I don't know if you did this on purpose or on accident. Like, you're also bringing in like a kind of like theological or humanistic lens of how we see conflict and repair at work. And I do think that we have this idea, and I love that you shared that story too, Cass, of like how this leader has brought her humanity and vulnerability because we do sometimes forget that leaders are learning in public. Something that you highlighted, Molly, that I do have a window in DEI and organizations is how many leaders, myself included, like one of my jobs, I was like 26 and all of a sudden I was like elevated over like 3 faculty and 6 graduate students and like I had never done any of I had to hire. I was not trained in any of that and it was incredibly stressful and there was interpersonal conflict that came in that really impacted my confidence as a manager because I'm like it's my first managerial position. Now there's conflict and I do not have the skills to manage all this conflict. So I do think sometimes we put leaders at a disservice because they're strong individual contributors, but we haven't trained them in what it looks like to manage people interpersonally. But I think also something I will say in my own career that has been interesting is for a long time I was looking for an environment that I wouldn't experience macroaggressions. I wouldn't experience interpersonal conflict. And then every workplace I went, there I was. And lately something that I've been doing instead of like leaving when there's conflict is saying like, hey, when you said this in a meeting, it kind of hurt my feelings. Or, hey, when this came up, and I've been surprised at how many people really genuinely do not know how they're coming off. I mean, from like in my last couple of roles, I've chosen to tell managers when I was uncomfortable. And I've been like beautifully surprised by their response of saying, I didn't know that when I said that that was a macroaggression, or I had no idea when I cut you off in a meeting, I made you feel like we couldn't collaborate. Like, how can we be different? And so I'm just wondering, yeah, if you've been able to see too that aspect of conflict and repair, and if you think maybe we're not as conflict positive as we should be in work environments. Maybe employees are too quick to say this person isn't open before they have that conversation. I'm just
Yeah,
curious
that's
your
good.
thoughts on that.
Absolutely. Cass gave an incredible example about a manager not managing very well, right? Because they were experiencing grief. You know, I get a lot of complaints about micromanaging, and micromanagers often are micromanaging because their boss is potentially micromanaging them. They might be afraid of losing their
Mm,
job. So
mm,
then
That
they're
part that
micromanaging
part
to try to not lose their job, they may not have had the training, and so they're micromanaging because they don't have all the tools they need. And again, I don't support micromanaging, but I look for
No, you
reasons
see where it comes from.
why people do it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of employees who also come to my office and they're like, "Should I confront this person? This happened. Should I confront them?" I'm like, "Hold on. It's not quite my favorite C word.
Yeah.
Can we have a conversation with them instead of confront them?"
Yes.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
My
kind of
dad
look at
used to
me like,
always say, conversation or confrontation. What are we doing?
yes, and employees look at me like it's the same thing. It's like, no, confrontations are usually a bit more abrasive. And if we can
Mm.
inquire more than we confront, if we can have a conversation with Ciarra, you modeled that really well with how you were talking about, inquiring about how you felt with certain comments or actions. Because a lot of employees will just say, well, I came up to them and I told them this and I told them they can't do this anymore. And I went to them in the break room and I'm like, well, that sounds very abrasive. How did they respond?
Hmm.
And then, it's maybe next time. There's a book called Humble Inquiry. It's a very short little book, but it
Ooh,
does talk about
I like that name.
humbly inquiring versus telling, fronting, assuming. And if we can genuinely ask, sincere questions, we will probably get a different response than just walking up to someone and having that confrontation.
Yeah.
But Ciarra, you demonstrated that really well with the examples that you gave.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I love Cass's examples too of that leader, right? Of what is happening behind the scenes for a leader's behavior and why don't we maybe humanize our leaders? But I think, yeah, my own
Yeah.
career, I used to think I want a boss who will already be where I need them to be. And now my standard is I want a boss who will talk to me, who we can have a bidirectional relationship, who will change towards me and I'll change towards them. And one thing I love about where you've taken this conversation, Molly, is something I say sometimes when I'm doing DEI trainings or well-being trainings is we are asking people to have conflict management skills that they don't even have in their home, that they didn't grow up with in their families.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden at
Yes.
work, we're supposed to be able to know how to navigate our anger, how to navigate our frustration. And so I think I think sometimes the behavior that we do see, especially as an employee because of power, you experience it as toxic. I do think for a lot of our managers, you're making me think about how much it is a lack of true skill, and just like conflict management skills that again, a lot of us don't even demonstrate in our romantic relationships or familial relationships. So why all of a sudden at work would we be good at this? And
Because we
what do you
can be
think, girl?
perfect at work. We can just do anything. We can just show up and have we do the perfect sales pitch. We speak perfectly. We're always eloquent. We always got our face together, right? Like it's this personification of all the things that we can't do at home where we're almost expecting ourselves unrealistically to
Yes.
show up in a way that is devoid of our humanity. And I think
Mm,
that's the biggest thing that I wish that people would take away from their work. You and finding the rhythm of your life within your work and within your home is the skills that you work on at work can be implemented in your life at home. And your life at home skills can be implemented in your work. And ideally, they should have some sort of synergy or integration,
mm,
and we don't have to keep everything so separate because honestly that fractures who we are and our sense of
mm,
being. And I see a lot of folks who are younger than me, I'm in my 40s, who are starting to come into the workplace or starting to get into leadership roles is this expectation that there's going to be some sort of fulfillment of their life through their work, which there can be 100%.
mm,
But it's not gonna be like that all the time, and it's actually takes a lot of internal processing and healing to get to that point. And if
mm,
you're expecting to come to HR like it's your parents, like, "Go fix this for me, mommy," that's kind of not, as we've talked about, that's not what HR's function is, you know?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of been danced around a little bit on this. We have to humanize our coworkers and even our managers.
mhm,
And Cass,
mhm,
you were touching on this. The trauma people have gone through and are currently going through, whether it's romantic or financial or related to grief and loss. It's not like the show Severance, where the second you walk in the building, those things
mm.
aren't there anymore, right?
Yeah.
You hit Ciara right where it is. She loves that show.
And that was just great. Anyway, Molly, you're killing it. Please keep going, please.
We have coworkers who have been through really difficult situations who are
Yes.
trying to repair themselves if they even have the the access and the ability to do that. We have people who are
Mm,
actively going through something, and we have people who are about to go through something. I mean, I've been divorced twice. I was not the best person to be around at work when I was going through either one of those things. That doesn't mean that, my intention was to be, a tyrant at work, but yeah, I was a difficult person to be around when I was going through divorce and religious deconstruction. And, the
mm,
more we can humanize people, not accept, any of their bad behavior, but, I was lucky in a sense that my parents raised me to get my emotional fulfillment outside of work. And if you
mm,
love your job, that is fantastic. Loving your job, loving your work, having friends at work, that is all great. But I wasn't raised with the expectation that those things needed to be there. So I was raised to have a job, to be able to build the life I wanted more outside of work. And so I think
mm.
that loving your job,
Yes.
loving the job's values, having friends at work, incredible. I think that that's what I would want for everybody. And when people rely on some emotional fulfillment from work, it's going to hurt even more when they don't get it. And I do think HR takes the brunt of that sometimes because we
Oof.
hear people's emotional difficulties.
Mm,
And again, I want every situation to be resolved in the best way possible. But when it doesn't happen for people who have more reliance on their job for their emotional fulfillment, it is more difficult. And this isn't me saying disconnect from work. This isn't me saying like turn the light off inside your head when you come into work. But I don't want people to depend as much on their emotional fulfillment from their job and their coworkers because
yes.
it's going to be an automatic letdown.
And
You
I think
can't
there's
you
this
can't put your emotions on capitalism. You can't
whoop,
do it.
You're
put
hitting
that
both
on
of
a
us. Go ahead, Kat.
t-shirt.
I'm gonna say
Put
something to
that
that
on
too,
a
but Cass, go
t-shirt.
ahead. That was nah, you ate that up, Molly. Cass, go ahead, because I got something to say too, please.
I think the other key point
Yes.
that goes back to the beginning is we also have to think people in HR are humans also who are also they
And they're
hear all
navigating
the
the
We're
brunt
employees.
of
If you don't like your
yes.
PTO policy, we don't like it either.
Yeah.
We want to work from home too.
right, right. And like you said, like they're the messenger. They're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out what is the best way to communicate this very complicated policy that I may have advocated against. But it's the decision of senior management to move forward with this. When I started, I had an internal DEI role or a dotted line to HR through a DEI role. And one of the first things that we got on the docket was, are we going to have Juneteenth off? It was 2021 when all that was happening, right?
Uh-huh.
And that was the first thing I was like, I can take this on. I'm going to champion this and whatever. And my HR business partner, she was like, yes, absolutely. Let's do this. We took it to the chief people officer. Let's do this, blah, blah, blah. We all were in agreement. Our CEO was like, I need the actual business case for why this is important. Because to me, it's just another holiday.
Mm,
He's like, personally, I don't care one way or the other. But he was like, it's
hmm.
just another holiday and a reason why people aren't working. So you need to make the business case, right? We were lucky enough to go back and be like, okay, we have all the information. Let's go ahead. And we were able to convince him. But I'm sure there's plenty of HR professionals and DEI professionals who are like, I'm doing the best that I can to advocate for all of these changes and policies, but I just don't have the corporate support or the C-suite support that is necessary to actually make it work.
Mm,
And I think
And there's
because
not
people
data
have
there's not
these
data for everything. There's
also
not
that
going to be data for everything. Your ethics and your values don't always have hard data points.
mm, mm.
that part.
No.
Yeah.
I
Okay, go
love
back to the t-shirts we're gonna make. Go ahead,
no, oh
Ciarra.
my god. Oh, first of all, yeah, Molly, you gotta get the merch, okay? But no, I mean,
Yeah.
in general, Molly, genuinely, I do hope at some point you do write a book because I think that you have such a beautiful perspective
Dear.
on workplace well-being. I'm putting that out there. I'm putting that out there in the
He's like, don't
universe.
put that on
I
me.
know
I
Molly's
got
like,
enough to do.
I do not dream of labor, girl, please.
Huh?
But I think something that you highlighted is like one, like I think a broader critique of how workplace structures divide and put everyone kind of in this defensive crouch of their own positions and their own power, and us not maybe having skills or workplaces maybe not encouraging skills that are more humanistic, whether that's conflict management, being able to be on radical candor with one another, being able to name what's uncomfortable, which maybe makes us more punitive with one another, and confused about the role of HR within all of that conflict. Which is why I really do like ombuds, because when I have worked with them, like they're always like something that they say from the jump is we are confidential and we do mediations, but we do not promise a solution. So, yes, we'll provide the space for you and this person to come to a solution, but the accountability on enacting that is upon you two. It's a relational solution. And so I like that they lead with that. Like it will not leave these walls, but you two are accountable to each other, which I think is really beautiful actually in some ways to point people back to one another. But I think you also
Is that
oh
something
yeah,
that a lot of organizations have? Because I don't know that I've ever had
healthcare
that.
healthcare
Healthcare
and higher
does.
ed, which I've worked in both those. So
Yeah.
Okay.
higher education and
We ain't
healthcare.
got that in tech.
Yeah, they need it in tech.
Right.
I think umbuds are phenomenal. But also, Molly, you highlighted so one, I think you highlighted, like, the humanity of workplaces and how maybe our structures could change to humanize one another, and how HR is also an employee, and we forget that. But two, you also highlighted that we might over-index on what work can give us, and it's interesting because in my one-on-one consulting work with a lot of women who are recovering from toxic work environments, something I say is we need to globalize your sense of purpose, and I've been doing that work with myself because I always wanted my career to be my everything, and lately, now at 31, I'm like, "I don't want this relationship to work anymore." I've been going on vacation more, I've taken more PTO, and I notice I like my job more because I've
Yes.
discentered what it does for me. So, I say all this to say, we had one of our questions was, "What strategies or boundaries help people stay grounded in environments that feel draining or dehumanizing?" And I'm wondering just how this idea of globalizing your purpose and, I don't know, other things can maybe be part of these tools that can help us be more grounded or help us work through environments that feel particularly difficult. So I'm just curious your perspective on that.
I resonate with that a lot. Even though I was raised not to seek my emotional fulfillment at work and to have a job that supports the life I want versus making my life my job, I still, like any millennial, got really involved in climbing the corporate ladder and
Me too.
leveling
We're with
up.
you. We're with you.
Remember when you're supposed to level up all the time?
Oh my gosh. Lean
Now,
in, Sheryl
Lean
Sandberg.
in. Let's
now we
not
all want to
worry. That's
level
a whole
down.
nother
Level down.
conversation. Level down,
Level down.
ratchet down.
And I ended up having to leave the workforce. So I was so burnt
Mm,
out
mm,
while I was getting divorced, deconstructing religion, working in a stressful job. I had a good boss, a good job, but when life is too much, things are too much. I had to leave the
yes.
workforce. I ended up teaching yoga for 10 years. I actually had to leave the
Wow.
workforce. I think it would have been helpful for me to understand that, depending on someone's struggle and where they're at, and depending on the state that you're in, there are potential leave options from work that give you protected leave to maybe deal with either the work stress or the
Mm,
personal life stress, or maybe it's all of it. FMLA applies to most companies in every state. Generally doesn't apply to the very small companies. You have to have at least 50 employees in a 75-mile radius. And then there are disability laws where, depending on what the struggle is at work, you can seek accommodations. And, a lot of people may be aware or not aware that they have a diagnosis, or they might have a diagnosis, or they're just struggling with maybe they haven't felt well and they don't have a diagnosis yet. But FMLA and the ADA don't require a formal diagnosis to take advantage of some of those benefits. As long as your life is seriously impacted, you can pursue FMLA or ADA and seek accommodations to help make
Tell
the workplace
everybody what
better.
those tell everybody what those stand for, because not
Yeah.
everybody might
Oh,
know.
apologies. So FMLA is the Federal Family and Medical Leave Act. So that gives most employees the option of up to 12 weeks off per year. It is unpaid leave. A lot of employees will use their vacation time, or they have a short-term disability policy through their benefits that you can elect, usually during open enrollment, to get some payment that way, because not everybody can take up to 12 weeks off unpaid. But sometimes having either the ability to take days off here and there or taking a chunk of time off can give you some time, to take care of what you need to take care of, or just take
mhm,
that break from work if your boss is really difficult and their boss doesn't want to intervene and that's what the situation is. Maybe taking some time away to find a new job is something that you can do.
mm,
And then the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA, is a disability law that applies to companies with 15 or more employees, and it mandates reasonable accommodations if those exist. So obviously, if you're a restaurant server and you want to work at home as your accommodation, that might not be reasonable to be able to do that at home. So the accommodations have to be reasonable, but there are options for employees that are experiencing difficulties and maybe need some kind of give, whether that's time off under FMLA or an accommodation under ADA. And then many states have paid leave programs, paid sick time, or laws that apply to even smaller companies.
mm.
Some states have laws where disability accommodations, if they're reasonable, are required at like 6 or more employees versus 15. whatever the struggle is at work in your personal life, but maybe it's impacting work, or maybe for me, I have ADHD. um, and it is more severe when jobs have been more severe, right? So sometimes you might think, "Oh, I have that, but it's not disabling. I don't need time off for that." But maybe the situation you're in personally or professionally is actually aggravating, your health
Yes.
in some way. And exploring the laws that are available either in your state or federally is something that I really want employees to know about, because I do see employees and managers struggling, and not every situation in that moment can be fixed. So if there's something that an employee can do to give themselves some relief, I would want them to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I was working my second job out of higher ed, I was like again like late 20s, maybe 26, 28, and I started losing my hair and like was really shocked cuz I was very young. Like I like many black women got like misdiagnosed with traction alopecia, which makes more no sense cuz I wear my hair like this every day. But eventually I got a diagnosis of autoimmune condition that causes stress related hair loss and other impacts, and I took off I think and I was only at that job 3 or 4 months, but COVID leave was still a thing in higher ed, so I was able to get, like, a month off to just work on my diagnosis, work on my well-being, and something I say all the time, actually, with both in deconstruction, because I talk a lot about ableism in the church, but also at work is, like, ability
Yeah.
status is the one identity that is fluid for everybody, and I think that folks tend to have a lot of pride around their ability status sometimes and also work environments push forward ableism, that makes it difficulty for employees to get those accommodations. And I know I felt like afraid to come forward and say, like, my body is rejecting this job. Like, but it was a helpful taking that time off made me realize I wanted to leave the job for good because it was the job that, like you mentioned, was inflaming that condition. But I do think it's important for folks to remember like that is a fluid identity for everyone. And we might have issues within our body that come up, and that those accommodations are there to help you to rest and recover. And I'm really glad I took advantage of it. And again, I'm feeling so young, I did feel some ableism from the organization, but I'm still glad I took that time off. I think the assumption was, "You're 26, why do you need it?" But I had the documentation, I was able to take it off, so
And it's so difficult. I think Cass touched on this earlier. When you're actively struggling with something, to have to do more labor and more work to try to figure something out is so tough. So if someone is feeling great, job's great, that's all awesome. Unfortunately, things tend to change, right? You may have the world's greatest boss. Next year, you might not. You may be
yeah.
physically and mentally healthy, and next year you may not be. So
Mhm.
I really would encourage people, even if they're feeling great and if their loved ones are feeling great, to understand some of the leave laws and accommodation laws in their state.
Yes.
So if something comes up with themselves or a loved one, because some of these leave laws apply to caring for loved ones, they already have some awareness on what's available to them rather than being in the midst of a stressful situation and having to figure yet another thing out.
Yeah.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
That's great advice. I
yeah.
think for a lot of people, especially those of us as millennials who are getting a little older, maybe we're starting to get into that sandwich situation where we have children at home, we've got parents that we might need to take care of,
Mhm.
siblings that we might need to take care of, whatever that looks like. Being aware of what your options are before you actually need them is clearly something that a lot of people need to be aware of. Not in a doomsday like the world is
Yeah.
ending kind of way, but just so you can, if something happened to someone I cared about and that I'm responsible for, what would my options be so that you can put those in action? And not to be afraid of asking the question, because I do think people are afraid to go to HR just to even ask the question and ask, where can I find the policy? I don't need you to explain it to me. I don't need you to do anything. But I've had friends who are like, I don't even know where to go to ask. I was like, go ask HR. Like, well, they're going to think that I need something. I'm like, just tell them you don't. Like, just tell them you can't find the policy. You're trying to I signed the employee handbook 5 years ago when I started. Has any of it changed? I don't know, like, just try to figure it out when you have the bandwidth to do so. I've loved this conversation. We always do a "What is your sacred descent?" We talked a little bit briefly about deconstruction and your role, but that's a big thing here at the Right There With You podcast that we talk about is, like, what is a way that we are keeping things sacred, but still dissenting from the world around us. And I don't know if this even applies to an HR situation, but hopefully it does.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. So we have touched on, how we show up at work, and that work isn't severance. We don't get to just walk into work and leave everything that we struggle with or think about or just are at the door. And something that I've had to learn, especially through religious deconstruction, is if I am not me, nobody else will be. And it's the best thing that we can do is live in alignment with ourselves. And the more that we are out of our own alignment, out of integrity with ourselves, acting how we think we should act in a way that's not authentic, that creates difficulty, right? Like that's uncomfortable, that can create stress. And so I really had to, again, in religious deconstruction, understand that I can't live my life the way someone else wants me to live it. I have to live my life the way that I feel good about. And if I am not me, nobody else will be. And if I'm not authentically me every day, the people I care about won't even know who I am. They'll know this curated version of me I'm putting out. And going through that and getting comfortable with that and leaning into that actually made work significantly better for me because I didn't have to act like a perfectionist. I didn't have to kind of feel like I was putting on a show to make my boss and other coworkers happy. If I was authentically me, that worked better than trying to be someone.
Oof.
Yeah, that's it. That's the word. I got nothing else.
Oh, we gonna end on that. Absolutely.
100%.
Oh, Molly, this was been incredible. One, you made, I think both of us, I don't want to speak for you, Cass, but really think about this from a new perspective. I think a lot about the role of HR. I think about it a lot with, like I mentioned, the women that I work with. And it's become an even bigger issue in the socio-political moment of just people not feeling workplace safety. And I think you made me think about how, because the way like equity and inclusion and well-being isn't the norm throughout work environments, HR gets zeroed in on as the only place for that. But it seems like that actually really taxes HR employees. And they're also working within a structure that might not be supportive of the solutions that they would want to see put forth. And so you've made me think about how it's not just about HR, it's about how do all of these workplace units work synergistically so that we have a standard of how we treat one another, a standard of collective well being, and also a way of navigating conflict. You made me think a lot more about how in my own consulting work, I might need to challenge how organizations see and frame and understand conflict because I think a lot of this would look different if places were conflict forward. And the last thing I want to say is I actually worked with an organization that purposely does agitation work with each other. Like they will like
Ooh.
basically like they explain it interestingly. Like say like Cass navigates like perfectionism a lot in the work environment. They might like have a panel of like people talk to her about like how have you been challenging your own perfectionism at work this year?
Oof.
How have you been trying to create more space for you to
Sounds
be human at
terrible.
work
Why would
this
I
year?
want to do that?
But it's positive.
No,
You said me and perfectionism. I'm gonna let that slide. Okay.
You were the only example. I don't want to put the spotlight on our guests. You know what I mean? But I think you just made me
that's
think.
okay.
You made me think about just globalizing this so much more. So, Molly, thank you for your time, your expertise, your friendship, your collegiality. And I'm so excited to share this episode with our community because it's very timely and just very substantive. So, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for
You're
your
very
time.
welcome.
This is always, it's always great to hang out with Ciarra, but it's also great to bring new people into the ecosystem
Yes.
and learn from you. We're just such students of the world, and we want to make sure that we have the ability to always be learning and be with our audience in the way that they're learning as well. So thank you so much for your insights.
Yeah. Thanks,
You're
Molly. And thanks.
welcome. And that's really why your podcast episodes have just been great because we're all humans. We need to humanize each other. And all the topics you've talked about so far are really about humanizing yourself and others and giving people the space to do that and showing interest in that. So I appreciate that content exists.
Thank you so much. All right, y'all. Well, thank you for listening to the pod. I'm so glad that you're here with us. Find us, like us, subscribe. We're all the places. Everything that we talked about will be in the show notes, including the books that we referenced and where to find us elsewhere online. All right, Ciarra, I'll talk to you next week.
Yeah, we'll be right there with y'all.
Bye.
If today's conversation resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. It helps more people find this space of exploration and connection.
And if you want to go even deeper, support us on Patreon. Your membership helps us keep these conversations going and gives you exclusive access to great content.
Because this isn't just a podcast, it's a community. And no matter where you are on your journey,
We're right there with you.